conversations about the things that matter. And I have to say, I was telling Dean Willis this earlier, we've had literal movie stars here at the Forum, but I think this is our most anticipated edition of the Forum since I've been here at St. Bart's. Dean Willis has an international following. I know many of them are watching us online now too, and it is really great to have with us Dean Robert Willis, who recently retired as the Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, and to introduce him more fully, I'll turn it over to my colleague, the Reverend Zach Nien.
Thank you, Peter. It is my immense joy and privilege and honor to introduce you to the Reverend Dr. Robert Willis. Robert served as Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, the mother church of the Anglican Communion, of which the Episcopal Church is a part, for a remarkable 21 years, from 2001 until just this last May. Before that, he was Dean of Hereford Cathedral from 1992 until the year 2000. He oversaw the cathedral during great societal change and tenuous times in the life of our communion, hosting the 2008 Lambeth Conference of Bishops and the Primates meeting in 2016. He currently resides with his partner Fletcher Banner in Wales. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to Robert Willis.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Dean Willis, at the onset of the pandemic, you became something of an internet sensation through your broadcast of morning prayer from the Canterbury Deanery Garden. With more than 900 broadcasts at this point over the course of several years, you've literally picked up millions and millions of views. The very first televangelist, Dean of Canterbury Cathedral, dubbed the Garden Congregation, of which we have members here today. These services of morning prayer were loved for the sense of peace and stability and tranquility they provided for so many, along with the connection to nature and the guest appearances by many furry animal friends, including the late beloved cat Tiger, who went viral after jumping between your legs and into your cassock.
They're saying no because it was Leo.
Oh, pardon. Tiger is still with us.
Tiger is the one who dips his paw in the milk.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble keeping them all straight. But do tell us more about the Garden Congregation. How did it start and what was your inspiration?
It was an inspiration which was the most ordinary thing in the world. I was Dean of Hereford for almost 10 years and Canterbury, as you said, for 21. And the rhythm of the day becomes an essential part of that life. And suddenly, at the beginning of the pandemic, which was in March 2020, all that stopped because the Archbishop closed all churches. And although the cathedral was just walking distance away from my front gate, it was there locked. It's not to say we didn't creep in and say prayers in there, but essentially it was locked. And we weren't even allowed to go and visit one another in one another's houses in the precincts, although we lived as a community. And on the first morning of that, it was Fletcher, my partner, who said, we can't let this happen. We've always believed that the cathedral is not just that house of prayer left to us by generations after generations standing in the middle of the great area of the precincts. It's a walled precincts with gates, and many people live within it. But we've always believed that the cathedral itself is the community living within the precincts, which gives hospitality, because it's the mother church of the Anglican world, to many throughout the world who visit as pilgrims and who come simply because of the stability over centuries that that place gives to their lives. And so he said, let's just go into the garden. Why don't you say morning prayer? And then, as an afterthought almost, he said, I'll bring a camera. And he wasn't in the least bit trained to, and he would be the first to say that if he was sitting here. Everything he did after that was self-taught. And so we went into the garden and said morning prayer. And he'd said maybe one or two of our people from the congregation will join in. And I don't think that we'd registered and this was a growing thing, we'd registered almost the loneliness of people during the pandemic throughout the world. So many people were isolated, sometimes in city spaces, but living in a lockdown, and some of the lockdowns are still going on in quite a fierce way throughout the world. That we're not through with the pandemic yet, although things we're much more used to, and we've become more relaxed about things. And so we began to do that, and gradually, as it happened, we got feedback from people telling their own stories, because when you say morning prayer, and what I tried to do at the time, and both of us thought this was how it was to be, was when I was a parish priest in a country village, visiting people in their homes in the afternoons, and going through the garden gate, you'd sort of say, these are really lovely flowers. What did you do? And they'd say, oh yes, well we got those because we saw them at the flower show and we picked some, all of that. You know the kind of conversation you had. You go into the house, if it's somewhere you've never been before, and they'll say, would you like, it's England, so would you like some tea? And we'd say, yes, thank you very much indeed. And then you tend to look at the books around the room, or the objects on the mantelpiece, or the cupboards in the room, and say, where did that come from? And these things prompt stories. And so you can then respond by telling your story, because you say, then that reminds me of this. But of course, because you're the parish priest, you've gone there also to encourage prayer and study, and also questions. This is a day with Wrestling Jacob as our first lesson at the Eucharist, which will follow, when God is there to be struggled with in a mental way, in a spiritual way, even in a physical way, when he's asking for particular things from you, and you feel that that is so, and it's taxing your strength. So that's how we thought we'd shape it. That we would begin with a greeting, we'd comment on what was going on in the garden and the seasons, and at the same time, and this grew, we'd comment on what was going on in the world. We'll come back to that. And then I think it was Fletcher's idea that we also looked at the dates in the calendars of the various Episcopal churches throughout the world, and would say, well, here we are at the moment, just 2 days off St. Luke's Tide. And so on the 18th of October, we would have said, so today is St. Luke's Day, which gave you then an opportunity to talk about doctors and healing and all these other things, but also the tradition of Luke being an artist and also a scholar who I actually believe must have lost all his notebooks time after time in those shipwrecks with St. Paul, and coming up on the beach at Malta and finding that all the stuff was sinking out at sea and starting again. So all these things, and an attempt also to bring the humanity of the scriptures and the various characters that were there into people's minds, so that it didn't just become writing on a page, but could be related by their characteristics to people that they knew. Now, any of this isn't rocket science. It's easier to think of stories from 50 years of ministry. It's the 50th anniversary of my deaconing this year, and it was on July the 2nd. So there's an enormous amount of story there which you build up in ministry. But they're ordinary human stories of mistakes and failures and successes and joys and shared things and shared sadnesses with families who had had a difficult time through the death of one of their members. But you were part of it and embraced into that family. Now the surprise to me, and this grew and grew, the surprise was the fact that always before I would have said that a human meeting, as you know, we're close now, I can read your body language, and you're thinking, don't go on too long because we have another service today. But at the same time, I'm reading the body language. I'm doing this automatically of the people around, so that you see, if you lose touch with them, you can go back and pick up the stitch you've dropped with another image. And I would have thought that physically that was the way, that was the best way. What we found, now I'll look at the camera, what we found was that there was an intimacy going on with the folk who were watching in Singapore or Brazil, and that was something that we had never, ever imagined could happen. So that when people come up to you and say, are you, this happened to me yesterday in Whole Foods of all places. My friend Kenneth here, with whom I'm staying, lives in an apartment with Whole Foods underneath. And I went down to get some milk. And at the milk counter, someone I had never met in my life before, a lady called Evelyn, came up and said to me, and she was being brave, and I wasn't in a collar or anything of that sort, "Are you the Dean of Canterbury?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, I'm one of your garden congregations. I just recognize your face, and how surprising, because you didn't know anything about this today, I don't think." Then we had a conversation, and we shared stories. But what was extraordinary was that, and she won't mind me saying this, I'm sure, if she's around or viewing, what was extraordinary was that she believed heart and soul that she was a close friend of mine because she knew me intimately from all that had gone on. And at the same time, with those who wrote in with emails, and some were long stories, but we read them all. It was impossible to get back to them all, but we did read them. And they too became to us names and situations that we knew about. It was parish ministry writ gargantuan, not just large, but so then how did people know about it? And here come not just the furry friends, but the feathered friends as well, because the moment that, and you're right, Leo, suddenly he was the first to go viral, ran into my cassock on that morning, and I looked at Pleasure as if to say, "Shall we stop?" And he just said, "Go on, it's fine." And then at that time, it really did become viral. I've no idea how many millions have seen that, but it's been shown over and over again in every continent in the world, and a lot of people don't even know what they're watching, but it's amusing because he seems to disappear completely. It's a sort of magic trick done by a priest in the garden. But then we had the business of Tiger surreptitiously with the milk behind. And then when Tiger had his leg amputated, the whole world sent get well soon cards, and yet the creatures and the rooster, Russell, who actually by that loud cock-a-doodle-doo in the middle of me reading the Passion narrative, and it got to the moment, you'll remember it, at that moment, the cock, we didn't hear the word crowed, because he'd walked onto the lawn and did that, and people got in touch and said, "How do you get a creature to do that?" You can't. It simply happened. At that point, he was walking around the lawn in that way. But the minute it happens, then people are aware of what's going on, and they tuned in. And that was how it became, I think, so well known around. People showed one another, and little clips were shown on news bulletins, and I think it appeared on everything over here in terms of CNN and the New York Times, and all sorts of photographs. And quite often, if you go to a thing, they'll say, "Have you got any cats with you?" But in fact, the cats were best summed up by someone writing in and saying, "I tuned in for cat and stayed for catechism." And so many, from the moment they tuned in, found themselves part of a community. And it felt good. So they weren't even only intimate with me, they were with one another throughout the world. And the term garden congregation was not anything invented by us. It was someone out there who said, "We are like a garden congregation." And I happened to mention that, and from that moment the thing caught on. And so our new YouTube thing, which Fletcher thought up, because when we left, it seemed very unfair to leave all that for my successor to have to deal with on his website. And so we've got a new YouTube website of our own, which is simply called Garden Congregation. But all these things came as of a family, but a family of hundreds of thousands across the world, which is extraordinary. So I think I will sort of calm down there, and then people can ask questions, and Zach's body language can relax a bit, because we're well on time.
I'll try to relax and channel the garden vibes. If you do have any questions, we'd love to take them on the paper slips, and you can hand them to my colleague Bailey Regan in the back, or you can write them in online in the YouTube comments, or by emailing my colleague Peter at pthompson@stbarts.org. Dean Willis, I'm wondering, is there a future for the Garden congregation?
We'd always said that when we were settled again, and that's still a little way off, both Fletcher and I are absolutely committed to doing something which might be not every morning, because it would be too much to maintain, but once a week, wherever we were, something of that kind, so that people could tune in. When I was growing up, and for all the years until his death, there was a man called Alistair Cook, who on the radio in the United Kingdom every week broadcast a letter from America, and his voice was known to us all, and he just said what was going on wherever he was, in New York or Washington or San Francisco, and one got the sort of flavor of that. And it was that kind of image that we thought, if we were over this side of the Atlantic, or we were out in Hong Kong or something of that sort, with the equipment, then we can have the Garden congregation from where we are. And then you will remember that occasionally we brought people in to interview, especially Beryl, who was the person who was a rescuer of animals who'd been found in without their parents or something, and brought hedgehogs and things like that. And we were thinking, well, we can have folk from where we are talking about their own lives. And so it'll be a bit different, but we intend to do something young.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if you start getting bids from CNN and ABC and NBC, but if you're looking for a modest parish church to pick you up in syndication, right, perhaps we can make a proposal. We would love to receive letters and prayers from Britain.
Thank you.
Here on this side of the pond. But I'm just struck at the ways that this Garden congregation has really made visible the invisible connections that are so a part of the Christian tradition: living to the dead, humanity to creation, saints connected across time and space, and the communion of saints and the body of Christ in ways that we might not readily see or expect. And having had the privilege to visit you at the deanery, I remember the portraits of all the past deans of Canterbury up on the walls. I think are you the 39th in succession?
39th since the Reformation.
Since the Reformation.
Yes,
I'm wondering if there's a particular dean of Canterbury past that might resonate with you?
I think that we would go around the portraits, you remember that, and go through deans that were there at the Civil War, and would talk about civil wars in the States, in the Sudan, in different centuries, and how they divided. So Dean Turner, who came back from the English Civil War, having been an exile because he was a royalist supporter as a dean, and came back, and his motto was "No revenge, we recreate and on we go." So his portrait was always significant. Dean Wootton, right at the beginning, at the Reformation itself, was made the first dean and invited the former prior of the monastery to be his vice dean, and two or three of the monks to join the new chapter to keep continuity, so that the bells would keep ringing and so on. People of that sort. I'm a great admirer of George Bell, because so many of he became Bishop of Chichester and was well known as the great friend of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But so many of the things of recognizing tourists and members of the Anglican Communion or other branches of the Christian Church who came, he said, we have to do things for them. This isn't just a place where a dean and chapter have a nice life. We actually have a mission to the world. And these people sort of stare down at you. George Bell's portrait is painted by de Laszlo, and he's standing like this. And my sister used to always say, have one like that, but you'll have a mobile phone in your hand. And but no, as you went round, you knew different ones from the occasion, and they're very different from the centuries.
How would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as someone who enjoyed the place to the full, and hopefully realized its potential to be a hospitable place, not just for members of the Anglican Communion, not just for Christian pilgrims who would identify themselves as Christian pilgrims, but for any searcher who was coming. And there are wonderful books written about pilgrimage. One of the best ones is by a young man called Guy Stagg. It's called The Crossway. And he sent me, I didn't know him at all, he sent me a proof copy of this from the publisher and said, perhaps you won't remember me, but you set me off on New Year's Day, I think it was 2012 or 2011, around then, and it was an ordinary 8 o'clock communion on New Year's Day, and after New Year's Eve there weren't many there because they were still sleeping in their beds, having celebrated in the night, but a young man and his parents came in, his father and mother and a friend, and he was setting off on an adventure, and he tells the story of that it was meant to go to Rome, it was winter, and when he got to Rome, he realized that wasn't his destination, so he goes on and into Constantinople, and then eventually to Jerusalem, and so on. And the mistakes and things he made on the way, and the hospitality from not just Christians, but from Muslims and Jews across the way, is really spectacular. I won't tell you how it all ends, because it's a significant way that it ends as well. So, but it's just one thing of that. So, Guy was a searcher. And I'd like also to be remembered as someone who was searching for new ways, and sometimes they came upon you unawares, like the Garden Congregation that was, I'd call it a happy accident sent from heaven. So, and here are the angels that
Indeed. Which really inverted the pilgrimage. I mean, you took Canterbury to the world.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have some questions?
We have a lot of questions and comments that have been submitted in addition to the 50 plus that are here in the room with us now. There are 150 watching live. A lot of people just simply want to express their gratitude to you. They and their family members during such difficult times in their lives really looked to you and the Garden Congregation for comfort, solace, and companionship. Yeah. There were questions, you and Zach have already talked about the future of the Garden Congregation. There are quite a number of questions about that. There are also questions about your retirement. Yes. Why did you choose to kind of step away at the height of your powers and reach? And how are you experiencing retirement right now?
Okay, I didn't choose to step away. It was actually the law of the church, not of England, but of the church, that when the clock struck on the 16th of May, I would become 75 and therefore could no longer exercise the office of Dean of Canterbury. So the choice would have been to stay, but the fact was that you walked away. And it did feel, just at that time, that it was a very difficult time to be walking away, because we've spoken about the fact that we were doing it because of the pandemic. But we all know that many things have beset our human race since then, which have become far more dangerous to us than the pandemic. So if one looks at the climate change, and we've been looking, Fletcher and I, at the churches in Florida, which have been devastated, and I'll say a little bit more about that at 11 o'clock, but and in other places there's terrible drought, and other places earthquakes, but Hurricane Ian for the United States was the most recent in a long line of these things. But then, of course, towards the end of what we were doing, the war broke out in Europe in a way that no one could have conceived. It was something, it happened in my parents' time. My mother and father hid in air raid shelters and things, but here we were seeing European cities of great sophistication being attacked and bombed and so on, and helping people to understand that. So, as you will know, we did quite a lot on climate change, and our new King Charles was obviously his whole life was given to trying to express that, and one sees and Prince Philip, his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, the founder of the World Wildlife, and all of those things were running parallel. But one wouldn't want to walk away from this, because I do think that we feel as a human race much more united in, you almost might call it the danger, the disaster of all of that. And so sitting in the garden in peaceful tranquility, and a green garden where there was water aplenty, one had to show images and speak of messages that had come through from the world. So yes, the pandemic caused it, but what we were grappling with and wrestling with, and we did it together, because one of the great touchstones, I think it was, Fletcher has a phrase about, I'll get it wrong, so I'll get told off later, I'm sure, but it's something like openly and resolutely Christian, but totally inclusive of all who are joining in. And we did have Buddhists and Jewish people and even some Muslims joining in, because the rhythm of the scriptures and the lifting up of creation in the hands of the Creator were all parts of that. And wherever they were, they could do that. And so sleepless people in the middle of the night could just switch on at any time. So those were the things that were there. So one wouldn't choose ever to walk away from that. And we do feel a burden to get back to it, but it's seeing how that might work, because it'll be a very different circumstance. It won't be welcome to Canterbury Cathedral. It'll be, but it will be, welcome to a morning prayer of some sort. And people didn't seem at all shy about it. Was morning prayer, but they would write to me and say, when my husband and I have had our dinner in the evening, we wash the dishes, dry them, and sit down and watch morning prayer. And others did it when they a day after, because they couldn't tune in. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. In your sermon for today, some folks have heard it already, many will hear it later. You talk about the importance of perseverance.
Yeah.
And one person is wondering, what does perseverance look like for you?
Perseverance looks like when everything is set against a particular activity. Everyone, no one's agreeing with you, and you're thinking, and yet you feel a burden from, and I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about the way in which people express this, they say, well, I've tried and tried and tried, and it seems that this is not the way forward. And perseverance is, despite all odds, this is God's will, and my prayers tell me that, and it may be that other signs will come, but it was the lesson from Timothy that did that, and I'll speak about it at more length in the 11 o'clock service. That St. Paul is saying, look, you may be downcast, everything might be against you, to Luke, because in Timothy 2 you get that lovely thing of St. Paul being in prison and him saying, everyone seems to have deserted me and only Luke is with me now. But the sense that they'd been through shipwreck and fright together, and in the end Luke will write it all down for us, is something that is about perseverance. But in your own life it could be anything at all. And it could be trying to make a relationship with somebody in terms of not succeeding to have the right keys to open that relationship, and trying and trying and trying again is a godly virtue. And I think I said in the sermon that in the Epistle of St. Peter, you get those steps of things that you add to, and climbing a step towards it. But nothing is just done by our own efforts. Every one of those steps has to be done by the grace of God. Justin Crisp, who is at New Canaan, and who was at the Yale event we've just been at together, brought his youth group to Canterbury in 2019, and they were really sparky group, and great to have them there for a week asking questions. And one of them, I think his name was Jack Harrison, asked me the question, who decides on my future, me or God? And who's in charge of it? That's a taxing question, but I said to him, God has given you the gift of free will, so even Mary herself could have said no to the angel. In fact, for our great salvation, she said, "Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word." And so you have the right to say no, even though you're feeling that God is asking you to do something. And then they were going the next morning, and that night I thought, no, that's not quite all the answer. And I'd said goodbye to them, and I realized they were catching an early train, and I rushed down to the station, and they were all standing around. And I said, I have just one more thing to say to Jack. And that is, you can say no as many times as you like, but if it's God's will, he'll present the same question in different forms, if it's a vocation of any kind or throughout your life. He won't let it go, but you always have the right to say no, and he'll represent it. And so I think that's how one might go from there.
I want to follow on this theme of persevering in relationships. And as tranquil as the deanery garden is, the cathedral grounds were often a site of wrestling and reckoning and disagreement and debate. And you've seen the church at its very best and at its worst. As our communion has grappled with human sexuality, climate change, reckoning with our colonial legacy, with matters of theology and belief and practice across the Anglican communion. Is it worth persevering in relationship?
You asked about the portraits of the deans earlier, and the one thing they gave over the centuries was perspective. And the different situations in which people have been called to serve God, and how sometimes that which seems so stable, and one thinks of the monasteries, for example, in the early reign of Henry VIII, they seemed as though they'd be there for absolutely ever. And then suddenly they were completely swept away, and people had then to look for different things. And I think we learn from one another in this way. And the kind of rage and wrestling with things that goes on is part of that. Now, what I always tried to do with the cathedral, and I remember saying to Rowan Williams when he said I'd quite like the cathedral to be used, it was a 3-week Lambeth Conference in 2008, much longer than the one we've just had. And I said to him, I want it to be used constantly by the bishops, but I don't want anyone to suffer a vote which will exclude them in this holy place. It's not what it's for. So if you could do that at the university and then be here too, and that is what happened. But I remember also the bishops were asked in their Ndaba groups, because they met with the same group every morning, and Bishop Tom Shaw from Massachusetts, who was one of the SSJE brothers as well as being bishop, a really lovely man, was in a group with Donald and Tata Mela, who was the primate of Tanzania, and they had to meet every day, and they were poles apart in certain ways. And they made a little video for the worship of the tent, which actually showed them going along a country lane, arguing, really and they did it well, actually, because they tapped into those things they really disagreed with. And they stopped, and Donald and Tata Mela said, "We don't agree, do we?" And Tom said, "No, I don't think we do." And then he looked at Donald and said, "Shall we continue to walk together?" And Donald said, "I think we will." And they went off down the road, still. And I think that's the way we work things out. But in that, we have a firm belief, the perspective is of the grace of God and the oil of the ability to forgive over and over again as being part of those things that we most believe in, and the sense of being able to do that in the cathedral where so much has happened, so much violence, and it's almost destroyed in the Second World War with the Baedeker raid and the bombs falling on it. But it's still there, and even if all those beautiful buildings were completely destroyed. As long as you put a simple chair in the middle of that ground, it would be a cathedral, a seat of the Archbishop, because the human community in prayer is what matters in that place.
There's a question about your thoughts on the future of the Church of England.
Right.
Apparently there's been some chatter about the bishops in the House of Lords and whether that should continue. As someone who spent your entire ministry in the Church of England, what are your thoughts on the future of your own church?
Well, the House of Lords is something that has a question mark over it anyway, because it's a second chamber. And it's not quite like your Senate. It's not an elected one. It's made up at the moment of hereditary peers and bishops and judges and people who've been appointed for really distinguished lives into it. But there's always been, since 1910, people were trying to get rid of it, and nobody could think of a better way of doing it. And so it's sort of still there. The fact that the bishops are there, but what I do know is that they do speak for faith. And that people like the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster or the Chief Rabbi will be in conversation with the Archbishop of Canterbury. If it's a matter of faith, then they can speak for that. But now there's also been a habit of ennobling, so to speak, those of other faiths of high rank who've won that kind of distinction through. I'd say that's not really a big issue. I think the big issue is the fact that the Church of England is the established church of the land, and we saw that in all its, shall we say, all its glory with both the Platinum Jubilee, but the funeral services of our beloved Queen. And it does feel as though tectonic plates have shifted with her going. We'd parked at the back of our minds the sense that she would one day not be there. But all of that shows the established church in that way. In order to be the established church of the nation, it actually has to speak for the nation and embrace the way in which the nation itself, in all its aspects, is thinking and moving and going forward. And sometimes it's dragged its feet on certain issues, and then question marks are asked. One thinks very much about the ordination of women, first of all to the priesthood, then to the bishop state, and now at the moment in terms of same-gender relationships, all those things. So if the nation goes too far that way, and the church, as an established church, is not voicing that, or in a creative dialogue and saying, well, this is the way we're going, and explaining in a way that the nation can, then there's a danger of the fabric ripping. But it wouldn't be the first time it had happened, because, of course, as you well know, when King Charles I was executed, to read out of the Book of Common Prayer was a criminal activity. And Charles I's funeral had to happen in silence because Bishop Juxon would not do extempore prayer. It was a sign of being a Puritan. So we've done it all before. And the ways of God are profoundly greater than anything in some tiny little island, because the Church of Wales and the Episcopal Church of Scotland and the Church of Ireland, the Anglican Church of Ireland, are all completely different churches. It's only the Church of England. And that's a thumbnail compared with Texas in terms of geography.
And in terms of the future of the church in general, do you see the Garden congregation as a model for what could happen in other places? And you spent 2 decades in Canterbury. What lessons did you learn there that you think could apply to the church in New York or California or Tanzania?
Well, what I would say is that the response of the Garden congregation, and that's a multitude of people, most of whom I will never meet physically, gives me huge hope. Now, there's a question at the end of the Gospel, which we'll read in a bit. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? And the Garden congregation and people coming to Canterbury Cathedral, like Guy Stagg with his pilgrimage, causes me to say yes. But, and as I gave to Jack Harrison that answer on the station, but it might not look quite like the church would design it to look, So I think that people can surprise you by the depth of their faith and rock you on your heels by thinking, gosh, I never knew that was in you. And the ordination and all of that means absolutely nothing at all in that, because the gift of faith is given all around. So I would be, following this experience, say very definitely, yes, there's faith there, and I've no pessimism about the church, but you have to see the Holy Catholic Church in all its spiritual depth, and also its ability to change and embrace what God is asking it to do.
Before I hand it back to Zach for one final question, I'll just let you know, to give you all a taste of just how widespread the Garden Congregation's reach is. Right now, live watching, we have people from a dozen states, including people who got up in California early to watch us. There are people in Canada, France, the UK, India, all watching live right this second.
Right. Thank you.
It's really hard to know exactly what to ask that will speak to our worldwide global audience today. I'd love to just ask, how are you and Fletcher doing in Wales these days, and what does this next chapter look like for
Sure.
you?
Wales was a sort of stopping place, because when we left we had to be somewhere, and it can't be Canterbury. And nowhere better than the green valleys over there, and not too far from where I was born and brought up, as so many will know, because I've described that on the way through. But so we're not quite sure yet where the best place will be, and the pressure of various voices around the world is something we're taking into account, and invitations here, there, and everywhere. So I think it's a case of prayer and watch this space. And then, but we're not suddenly going to vanish. We feel a responsibility to God for the ministry He's given us, but we're not quite sure what shape that will take yet, if that makes sense. It somehow feels too early to make decisions, and I think probably we'll say 2023 will be a year of new beginnings for both of us.
Well, your hospitality at Canterbury all these years and your hospitable spirit that you bring to this place has certainly been an inspiration to us at St. Bart's as we pursue radical welcome for our city and our world. So I speak for all of us when I tell you, you always have a home here on Park Avenue in New York.
Thank you very much indeed.
And
can I say to the people watching across the world, thank you for being here. You have been as much an encouragement to us, to Fletcher and me, as we seem to have been to you, and it's been really a lovely lesson to learn in senior years. Okay, thank you.
Much love to you. Thanks so much.
Good, thanks.
Dean Robert, we are so immensely grateful that you have stopped by on your way back from New Haven to the UK. Thank you all for being here as well. We hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m., whether you're here in person or online. Dean Willis will be preaching at worship. We also hope you'll be back next week for the forum. We'll be welcoming Randall Ballmer, who's a professor at Dartmouth College, and he'll be talking about his new book on the influence of religion on sports. It's available in the bookstore if you want to read it in advance. We hope to see you then as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.
Sorry for the details I kept getting.